My name is Claire Donovan, and at 13, I thought the fight to be loved was finally over. Standing in front of the house with my new parents, the Thompsons, should have felt like a homecoming, but years of being passed over, shuffled, and relabeled as too old to place had turned that moment into something weightier than joy. I can still hear the way my old caseworker once sighed. Most families want someone younger. It's just how it goes. The memory of that fluorescent-lit office, with my duffel bag already packed before she told me the placement fell through, never really faded. Now, as the front door opened, and they smiled like this was forever, something in me wanted to believe it was. But what no one around us saw, not the neighbors, not the agency, not even me, was that their smile wouldn't last. And I was already on borrowed time. Before I tell you what happened the night they decided I wasn't worth keeping, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever felt punished for being difficult when all you really needed was to be safe. The first weeks in the Thompsons' house were strangely quiet, like everyone was tiptoeing around an unspoken rule. Cheryl Thompson, who insisted I call her mom from day one, was meticulous, not just about her white rugs and picture frames, but about her image. She took pictures of us at church, framed a certificate from my middle school on the hallway wall, and signed every permission slip with a flourish. I noticed early on that she flinched if I laughed too loudly or touched the thermostat without asking. Her husband, Greg, was less performative, kind in a soft-spoken, keep your distance kind of way. He never raised his voice, but I could feel his tension when he watched me from behind his newspaper, like I was something he didn't know how to fix or trust. The first time I asked if I could invite a friend over, Cheryl looked up from her coffee with a measured smile and said, "Let's just get used to being a family first." There was always a reason why we weren't quite ready. My clothes had to be ironed, my room had to be spotless, my attitude had to be more cooperative. I tried, I really did. I memorized their routines, said thank you after every meal, didn't slam doors, didn't raise my voice. But trying to be perfect made me feel like I was holding my breath all the time. And even then, something always slipped. A missed chore, a bad grade, a comment that came out wrong, and her expression would shift, just slightly, like a curtain twitching. A few weeks in, I found the garage door locked when I went out to grab my bike. Cheryl said it was for safety, but I caught Greg looking surprised when she said it. Another time, I noticed a box with my name on it shoved in the hall closet, the same box I came with, the same one they'd said we could throw out now that I had a room of my own. I stared at it longer than I meant to, like it was a warning I didn't yet know how to read. Later that week, I asked if we could go shopping for a school dance dress, and Cheryl gently reminded me we had to be practical with our choices. She bought me a clearance rack sweater instead. One night after dinner, Greg mentioned something about taking me camping that summer. He sounded excited, almost proud. But Cheryl cut in too quickly. "We'll see if that's appropriate," she said, eyes still on her wine glass. Greg didn't argue. He just folded his napkin carefully and cleared the plates. There was a rule about closed doors. Mine had to stay open when I wasn't asleep. Cheryl said it was about transparency and openness in the home, but it felt like surveillance. Once, I came back from school to find she had rearranged my dresser drawers because things looked messy. She said it casually, like it wasn't a violation. I didn't argue. But I noticed she'd folded my underwear like hotel linens, perfectly stacked in columns. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how long before she'd go through my backpack. 2. At school, I kept quiet. I didn't tell anyone I was adopted. I didn't want questions. My English teacher, Mrs. Henley, once asked us to write a personal narrative. I handed mine in blank. She returned it with a sticky note that said, "Try again. I know you have something to say." I threw it away. The first time Cheryl got angry, it wasn't loud, it was cold. I had forgotten to take the chicken out of the freezer before school. When she saw it still sitting there at 6 p.
She didn't yell.
She just looked at me with a calm expression and said, "I see we're still not ready to be responsible." Then she microwaved a frozen lasagna, served it silently, and didn't speak to me again until the next morning. That night, she left a printout on the kitchen counter labeled Chore Accountability Chart. My name was at the top in bold. I kept telling myself it was just discipline, that this is what normal families did. But I started noticing little things disappearing. A bracelet I wore every day, a framed picture from a field trip that Cheryl had once proudly taped to the fridge. Gone without a word. When I asked about them, she said, "Maybe you left them at school," then changed the subject. I began taking inventory of my own belongings in my head, afraid they might vanish. 2. One Saturday morning, I overheard them talking in the living room. Cheryl said, "It's not working. She's not who I thought she'd be." Greg didn't respond right away. Then, in a low voice, he said, "She's a kid. We're the ones who signed up." I froze at the top of the stairs, holding my breath so hard my ribs ached. I waited until their voices faded before going back to my room. That day, I packed a small backpack with my essentials, not to run away, just in case. In case what, I didn't know. But I kept it under my bed like a fire escape. Let me ask you this. Have you ever lived in a place where everything looked like love but felt like a countdown? Because I did. And I had no idea just how fast the clock was ticking. It started with a slammed door, not mine, theirs. Cheryl's voice, sharp and clipped, bounced down the hallway like a warning shot. I was sitting at the dining room table, doing homework, when Greg stormed past me and out onto the porch. The screen door rattled behind him. Cheryl stayed in the kitchen, moving things with a little too much force. Drawers opened and shut. Plates clinked in the sink. I didn't say a word. I just kept writing, even though my hand was trembling and I'd read the same math problem 5 times. When she finally walked into the room, she was holding a white envelope in her hand. "Claire," she said, her tone too calm, "we need to talk." She sat across from me, laying the envelope flat on the table like it held something sacred. I glanced at it, no name, just sealed. I remember thinking it looked official, but not urgent. "This is from the agency," she said. "It's about a follow-up visit. They do these sometimes just to check in. It's standard." Her eyes didn't leave my face, but her smile was brittle. "We want to make sure everything is smooth before they come." I nodded, even though my chest tightened. She tapped her fingers against the envelope like she was waiting for something. "There can't be any drama, Claire." "Understand." I said I did. But in that moment, I understood something else. They were already rewriting the story. And I was supposed to play the part of the grateful daughter, quiet, obedient, forgettable. The visit happened on a Tuesday. A woman named Denise came, cheerful and overdressed, with a clipboard and soft eyes. Cheryl offered her tea, and Greg took the day off work to be there. I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for judgment. Denise asked questions. How was school? How were meals? Was I adjusting well? I said yes to everything. Cheryl beamed the whole time. She even laughed, once, when Greg said I had a stubborn streak. "We're working on that," she added. Denise nodded, scribbled something down, and asked to speak with me alone. We sat in the backyard. The grass was wet and the chair cushions damp, but Denise didn't seem to care. She leaned forward. "So," she said gently, "how's it really going?" I hesitated. I could hear a bird chirping somewhere behind the fence. The air smelled like fertilizer and fabric softener. "It's fine. I said. They're particular. Denise smiled. Most parents are. I didn't say anything else. I didn't tell her about the missing picture frame, or the locked garage, or the chore chart with only my name on it. I didn't mention how Cheryl once made me rewrite an apology letter for accidentally breaking a mug because my first draft lacked accountability. I just nodded and waited for her to stop asking. The next morning, things felt different. Cheryl didn't say good morning. Greg left early, without eating. At dinner, she placed a casserole on the table, then looked directly at me and said, "You know, Claire, it's not lying if you don't say anything, but it's still dishonest." I looked up, confused.
What?
She sipped her water. "You had an opportunity to be transparent yesterday. You didn't take it. That concerns me." I stared at my plate. The casserole smelled like cheese and something burned. "I didn't lie," I said softly. I answered what she asked. Cheryl set her glass down. "We're not going to argue about semantics. If you can't be honest with the people trying to help you, maybe you're not ready for this kind of commitment." Her voice was calm, but the words cut with precision. I wanted to ask what she meant by this kind, but I already knew. The next few days were tense. She stopped doing my laundry. My backpack was moved one day, unzipped and badly repacked. I came home from school to find my laptop missing from my desk. Cheryl said she was holding it until further notice because of behavioral concerns. When I asked what that meant, she said, "You know what it means." Greg stayed quiet. He started coming home later, spending more time in the garage. The house became a place of silence, punctuated by rules. No snacks after school. No phone after 9. No locked bathroom door. No room without supervision. I counted them. 11 new rules in 4 days. The breaking point came on a Sunday night. We were eating in silence when I asked if I could attend a sleepover birthday party that one of my classmates, Haley, had invited me to. Cheryl didn't look up from her salad. "No," she said simply. I waited. "Why not?" I asked. She finally looked up. "Because it's not appropriate. You don't need to be around children who weren't raised with our values." I blinked. "Haley's nice. Her parents are too." Cheryl's eyes sharpened. "Claire, when we took you in, we agreed to give you structure. This," she gestured toward me, "this constant need to challenge every boundary, it's exhausting." I tried to hold her gaze. "I just wanted to go to a birthday party." Her fork clattered against her plate. "You don't get to decide what's normal. We do. And frankly, I'm starting to think this situation isn't fair to anyone." Greg didn't say a word. 2 days later, I was called to the office at school. A woman from the agency was waiting, the same one who'd done the intake interview months ago. She smiled softly, but I could see something in her face that made my stomach flip. "Claire," she said gently, "you'll be staying with us for a little while. The Thompsons have requested a placement reevaluation." My ears rang. "What does that mean?" I asked. She looked down. "It means you're going to pack your things." When we got to the house, Cheryl had already laid out 2 boxes. Not suitcases, boxes. My clothes were folded and sealed in clear bags. My toothbrush was still wet, but placed on top like an afterthought. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Greg was nowhere to be seen. I stood in the center of the living room and felt something cave in. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're just giving me back?" Cheryl didn't flinch. "We gave it a fair chance, Claire. But you're not a fit for our family. And we're not obligated to continue if it's not working." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I don't even remember picking up the boxes. I just remember the sound of the car door closing behind me and the way the porch light never came on. That was the moment I learned. Some people only love you when you stay small, silent, and easy to photograph. But the second you need more than a photo, they disappear. The car ride back to the agency felt like floating underwater. Everything outside the window blurred: houses, trees, kids walking home from school, like the world had kept moving without me. Denise drove without speaking, her hands steady on the wheel. Every so often, she glanced over like she might say something but never did. I clutched the drawstring bag that held the last of my things: deodorant, a notebook, a pair of sneakers with a hole in the sole. My name was written on the outside in permanent marker, like I was inventory again. No longer Claire Thompson. Just Claire. We arrived just after 5
M.
and the building felt smaller than I remembered. Inside, a receptionist offered me a juice box, like I was 6 years old again. I took it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands. They put me in a temporary room. No posters, no closet, just a cot and a metal locker. I wasn't officially placed anywhere yet.
We're working on it, they said.
It'll just be a few days. I nodded and unpacked the little I had. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall until the lights dimmed. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't sleep either. I just counted the tiles in the ceiling: 8 across, 6 down. The next morning, a staff member brought in a clipboard and asked if I wanted to talk to someone. I said no. Then she asked if I wanted to call the Thompsons to say goodbye or get closure. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the word felt so wrong. Closure? There was no ceremony, no warning, just a decision made behind a closed door and a packed box waiting by the stairs. No, thank you, I said, and she nodded like that was normal. School called later that week. I was technically still enrolled, but my teachers had been told I'd be absent for a while. Denise asked if I wanted to go back to finish the term or wait until a new home was confirmed. Go back where? I asked. To the same classroom where everyone knows I got dropped like a library book? She didn't answer. I decided I'd rather be invisible than pitted, so I told her I'd study from here. The agency printed off assignments for me, but no one checked if I did them. On Friday, I overheard one of the caseworkers whispering about me in the hallway. Returned after 6 months, she said. 13th's a hard age. Most people aren't willing to stick it out. Another voice responded, lower, but still clear. Especially not with one like her. The words hit before I could brace for them. One like her. I didn't even know what they meant by that anymore. Too quiet, too bold, too angry, too aware? Whatever it was a type people avoided. A type they explained away like a defect on a clearance rack. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned the bathroom without being asked. I offered to help store donations in the storage closet. No one thanked me, but no one told me to stop either. It felt like something to control, even if only for a little while. At night, I wrote letters to myself in the back of my notebook. Not poems, not rants, just facts. Where I'd lived, how long I'd stayed, who promised what. It helped to see it written down. Proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting room. A man I didn't recognize introduced himself as Mr. Rayner. He wore a brown blazer and spoke with that too careful tone adults use when they expect you to snap. We're working on a long-term plan, he said, laying out a paper-labeled stabilization track. We're looking at group homes as a possibility. It may offer more structure for someone with your history. I didn't speak.
He didn't need me to.
He already had the file. Later that evening, as I was taking out the trash, I saw another girl being brought in. She looked around 11 and had one stuffed animal clutched to her chest like it was breathing. Her eyes met mine for a second. Not scared, more like tired in a way I recognized. I held the door open without speaking. She walked in without a thank you. We didn't need words. We already knew what each other had been through. Over the next few days, I began to realize how different I was now. Not louder, not meaner, just sharper at the edges. When a new staff member asked if I needed help with something, I said no before I even knew what she meant. When another girl tried to borrow my sweatshirt, I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust her, but because everything I'd once given freely had been taken away without care. I was learning how to hold my shape, even if it made me colder. And then something strange happened.
Mrs.
Henley, my old English teacher, called. Denise put her on speakerphone. Claire, she said, I just wanted you to know I saved your seat. If you ever want to come back to class, you can. And if not, I'll mail you the books. You always had a good sense for story. I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, thanks. After we hung up, Denise looked at me. You okay? I nodded, but inside something cracked just a little. Not in a bad way. Like a frozen lake starting to thaw. That night, I took the notebook from under my pillow and started a new page. At the top, I wrote, what I know for sure. I didn't have much to list. But I wrote, I'm not broken. I wasn't the wrong fit. I was the one who stayed. I underlined that part twice. The system didn't change. No magical family showed up with open arms. But I began changing anyway. I started asking for small things, a different meal, a library pass, an extra blanket. Sometimes they said yes. Sometimes they didn't. But I asked anyway. And every time I did, I felt a little more like a person. A little less like a file number. Because the truth is, after you've been given back like a defective toy, even breathing on your own terms becomes an act of resistance. And I was just getting started. It was raining the morning I decided to leave. Not run away, not in the way the movies make it look, with a duffel bag and a dramatic goodbye. I just meant leave the script. Stop letting other people decide who I was supposed to be. I woke up early, before the hallway lights turned on, and dressed in silence. Jeans, sweatshirt, sneakers, nothing that said anything about me except that I was done waiting. I didn't even know what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't sit through another meeting where someone folded their hands and told me what was best for a girl like me. I needed to say something, even if it made things worse. At least then the silence would belong to me. The agency had scheduled another review for that day. 3 people were coming: Denise, Mr. Rayner, and someone new from the school district. I was supposed to sit in and nod along while they discussed long-term housing goals and emotional readiness. But instead, I asked for 10 minutes to speak first. Denise blinked. Mr. Rayner frowned. The school rep, a tall woman with a tablet and nervous energy, said, of course. They expected me to cry, or to ask not to be placed in a group home, or to say I'd try harder next time. I did none of that. I'm not going back to a house where I have to earn my place every day, I said calmly. If that's what you're offering, then you don't know what a family is. Denise opened her mouth, but I kept going. You all keep calling me resistant or difficult. But maybe you should call me awake. Because I watched 2 adults send me back like I was a cracked dish, and the only thing you want to know is if I'll still sit nicely on the shelf for the next ones. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Mr. Rayner set his pen down. Claire, we're not here to punish you. We're here to help you find stability. I cut him off. Then help me stay somewhere that won't treat me like a test. The silence that followed was dense. The school rep cleared her throat. I think, she said cautiously, that we should consider giving Claire a voice in her plan. It's her life, after all. Mr. Rayner didn't answer right away. but his fingers drummed once on the folder before he nodded. "We'll make a note." Later that day, Denise pulled me aside. We stood in the staff kitchen, where the fridge always buzzed and the linoleum floor curled at the edges.
"You shook them," she said.
"I don't know what they'll do with it yet. But you made them listen." I didn't respond right away. Then I asked, "Do you think I was wrong?" She looked at me, really looked at me, not like a case but like a kid, and said, "No. I think you were tired of pretending to be grateful for something that didn't feed you." Something shifted after that. It wasn't obvious. I didn't get special treatment or more comfortable sheets.
But the way people spoke to me changed.
A little more careful. A little more honest. They asked what I wanted for breakfast instead of handing me a tray. They stopped calling my behavior non-compliant and started using words like boundary setting. I wasn't suddenly free, but I wasn't invisible anymore either. A week later, a volunteer named Beth came in to lead a workshop on college prep. She had a kind face and an annoying binder full of brochures. Most of the other girls tuned out, but I stayed. At the end, she handed me a sheet about something called the Independent Living Program, a small residential setup for older teens who had demonstrated readiness. I folded it and put it in my pocket without saying anything. That night, I took it out and reread it 3 times. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't someone promising love and taking it back. It was space. My own. I applied. The process took 3 weeks. Interviews, paperwork, more evaluations. I was honest this time, brutally so. I told them I wasn't always easy, that I got quiet when I didn't trust people, that I sometimes said things too sharply because I was tired of being small. But I also told them that I kept my room clean, finished what I started, and never once let anyone forget my name. That last part mattered more than they knew. When the letter came, I didn't open it right away. I walked around with it in my jacket pocket for half a day. Then, after lights out, I took a flashlight from under my bed and read it slowly. Approved. Move-in date, 3 weeks. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just lay back down and stared at the ceiling tiles again. But this time, I wasn't counting them to pass the time. I was counting them to say goodbye. The next morning, I started packing. I didn't own much, but I folded it carefully. I wrote a letter to the girl who had arrived 2 months earlier with nothing but a frayed hoodie and a hollow stomach. I told her she hadn't failed. I told her the leaving wasn't her fault. Then I folded that too and taped it inside my notebook. When I walked out of that agency 2 weeks later, no one clapped. No one threw a graduation party. Denise gave me a ride, and I sat in the back seat with my bag on my lap. But the sun was out. The sky was clear. And for the first time in months, the road ahead didn't look like a detour. It looked like mine. The first night in the new apartment felt wrong in all the ways I hadn't expected. It was too quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that makes you aware of every clock tick, every footstep from the hallway outside. The walls were bare. The sheets were scratchy. The small kitchenette smelled faintly of bleach and stale instant noodles. But it was mine. I didn't have to knock before entering. No one checked my drawer arrangement. No one taped rules to the fridge. I stood in the middle of the room with my box of folded clothes and realized there was no one waiting to tell me if I had done this right. And still, a part of me braced for correction, like a ghost from a house I no longer lived in. The program gave me a stipend card, a chore list for the shared areas, and a paper with my responsibilities printed in bold. It felt clinical but honest. No fake hugs. No promises of forever. Just expectations I could meet and boundaries I could name. My roommate, Jasmine, was 17 and already halfway through her community college certification. She nodded when I introduced myself, then returned to her laptop.
No small talk.
No interrogation. It was the kindest silence I'd ever shared with someone. That night, I made microwave rice and sat on the edge of the bed, chewing slowly and letting the heat sink into my chest like something earned. The agency still checked in weekly. A woman named Trina came by every Tuesday with her tablet and her list of questions. Are you adjusting well? Any conflicts with your roommate? Are you keeping up with your responsibilities? I answered in short sentences. Sometimes yes,
Sometimes no.
but always honestly. Trina never pressed when I hesitated. She just typed and nodded. You're doing fine, she said once, and I believed her. Not because she smiled, but because she didn't say it like I owed her for the effort. A few days later, I went to the local high school office and re-enrolled. I stood in line behind a boy joking with his friend about skipping third period, and for a moment, I hated how casually they belonged there. When it was my turn, the secretary didn't even blink at my paperwork. Just stamped a date, handed me a class schedule, and said, "Welcome back." I walked out with the sheet clutched like a lifeline. I wasn't sure what the welcome meant, but the fact that she said it, without sarcasm, without warning, stayed with me all the way home. School felt strange. My old classmates barely remembered me. A few whispered when I passed, but no one asked where I'd been. That should have hurt, but it didn't. It gave me cover. I took a back seat in every room. I did the assignments. I sat quietly through lectures. But I was there. And for now, that was enough.
Mrs.
Henley waved when she saw me in the hall. Glad you're back, she said softly, and didn't add anything else. That night, I opened the book she'd given me months ago, still unopened in my bag, and started reading. The first chapter felt like a secret invitation. There were still hard moments. Grocery money ran thin. I once burned a pan trying to boil eggs. Jasmine and I argued over cleaning duty, and I accidentally snapped at her with the same tone Cheryl used to use on me. The silence afterward burned worse than the pan. But I apologized. Not out of fear, out of respect. And Jasmine accepted it. We didn't hug. We just started doing the dishes together again the next day. That was the difference. In this place, you didn't have to perform forgiveness. You just showed up again. On Sundays, I took long walks through the neighborhood. I found a bookstore with secondhand paperbacks and a cashier who never asked questions. I found a park bench near the bus stop where I could sit and watch the sky change colors. I even found a small cafe that let me study there for hours with just a cup of tea. The world wasn't soft, but it was spacious. No one told me how to hold myself. I could just be, even if I hadn't fully figured out what that meant yet. Then one evening a letter came in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in thick, neat print. I opened it on the couch, heart already thudding. Inside was a single folded card. On the front, a watercolor of 2 chairs facing the ocean. Inside, one sentence in handwriting I recognized immediately. We hope you find what you're looking for. No name.
No epalegi.
Just that. I didn't tear it up. I didn't cry. I set it down on the table and walked away. That was my choice now, not to carry what didn't belong to me anymore. Weeks passed. I started keeping a list taped beside my bed. Things I did without being told. Bought groceries. Paid bills. Sent a thank you email. Asked a question in class. These weren't miracles, but they were mine. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was growing forward, not just reacting to someone else's rules. And yet, every now and then, I'd catch myself flinching when I dropped something or left a drawer open. Old habits, old fears. They didn't vanish just because I changed zip codes. But something had shifted. One morning, I made 2 mugs of tea and handed one to Jasmine without thinking. She raised an eyebrow but took it.
Thanks, she said.
I smiled and sat beside her. We didn't speak for the next 30 minutes. The quiet didn't feel tense anymore. It felt earned. That afternoon, I opened a new notebook and wrote just one line on the first page. I am still here. Then I underlined it, once with a slow, steady hand. Not everything was healed. Not everything made sense. But the story wasn't about being chosen anymore. It was about staying. Choosing myself, even when no one else did. Choosing to keep going, even after being handed back. And that was enough for now. A few months later, I found myself standing in front of a filing cabinet at the community center, sorting through folders for my internship supervisor. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The office buzzed gently with conversations I wasn't part of, and for once, I didn't mind. I pulled a folder labeled volunteer applications and slipped it into the drawer, pausing for a moment as my fingers rested on the metal handle. The last time I stood in an office like this, I was waiting for someone to decide if I was worth keeping. Now, I was just putting things in order, mine included. That same afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Henley again. She was leading a writing workshop for teens in one of the conference rooms. She glanced up, smiled, and said, "Claire Donovan, still got a pencil in your hand?" I laughed, caught off guard by how easy it was to smile. "Trying," I said. She handed me a flyer. "We've got an open slot if you ever want to help co-lead. Think about it." I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket.
I didn't say yes.
But I didn't throw it away either. Back at the apartment, Jasmine was cooking stir-fry. The place smelled like soy sauce and garlic, and music played low from her phone. We'd grown used to each other. Not close, but solid. We didn't ask questions we wouldn't answer. We split bills, traded chores, and took turns buying paper towels. Some nights, we watched old movies in silence. Others, we stayed in our rooms and lived our own quiet lives. But there was safety in the rhythm. It felt nothing like family, and that was okay. I didn't need another mother. I needed space to be myself, without auditioning for affection. One morning, I received a small envelope from the Independent Living Program office. Inside was a certificate, simple, black print on white paper, stating that I had completed 6 months in the program with no behavioral violations and consistent performance. "You may apply for extended housing and educational support," it read. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with confetti. But it was the first time in my life that something official had said in writing that I had stayed. Later that week, I went to a local thrift shop and bought a cheap picture frame. I didn't hang it on the wall. I kept it on my desk, beside a plant I'd somehow managed not to kill. That certificate wasn't about approval. It was about proof. I had survived, not just the foster homes or the return or the quiet humiliation of being given up. I had survived myself, the ache of wanting something no one knew how to give. And I had built something steadier than hope. I had built continuity. Sometimes I still walk past families on the street and wonder what might have been. I see moms fussing with zippers, dads lifting kids onto their shoulders, siblings arguing over snacks. It doesn't make me angry anymore. Just curious. Like someone peeking into a house they once visited but never moved into.
I don't envy it now.
I understand that not every family knows how to stay. Some just know how to start things they don't finish. There's a journal I keep, still hidden in my drawer, where I write down the moments I wish someone had witnessed. Not because I need validation, but because being seen, even in memory, makes it real. I wrote about the day I bought my own bus pass. The night I cooked a meal that didn't burn. The morning I passed a math test and walked out without doubting if I'd earned it. Little things. Small proofs. They add up. This morning, I signed up for next semester's classes. Introduction to Psychology. College Writing. A part-time job at the front desk opens next month, and I think I'll apply. Not because I want to impress anyone, just because I want to keep building something with my own hands. Afterward, I walked by a bulletin board with a quote pinned to it. What you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. I don't remember who said it, but I copied it down anyway. Because lately, that's what my life feels like. Not a comeback, not a dramatic ending, just a slow, quiet rhythm of choosing to stay.
Choosing to keep the lights on.
Choosing to make tea and wash the dishes and call my teacher back. Choosing not to vanish. If you've been watching this far, thank you. I didn't tell this story to ask for pity or applause. I told it because I know what it feels like to be returned, to be passed over. To think that love means shrinking yourself small enough to fit someone else's idea of worth. But I also know now that's not the only way to be seen. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope my story inspires you to recognize your own inherent worth, no matter who doesn't see it.